Hello, everybody. Are we awake this morning? Hands up if you're awake. That was a trick question. Hello, everybody. It's great to be in Manchester. And also just want to, as per usual, thank the UKNOF team who put this together. They do a great job, especially Keith. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 5G. I'm going to start with the bandwagon slide. You might have been aware that there's a bit of a bandwagon on this, and of course with my NASA links, there was actually a bandwagon mission patch. There's a long story about it, Google it, but it's kind of, there's a lot of people jumping on this bandwagon, and there's some of us that are trying to remind us to try and be pioneering. And I think there's a lot of risk in this technology that the bandwagon overtakes the pioneering. And that's my kind of personal take on what's going on in 5G world and actually in standards in generally. So why do we need 5G? Well, everybody's online when they're awake. Even when they're not awake, they're online doing stuff, syncing diaries, downloading updates to the latest Xbox game, but pretty much everyone's online. And this, I kind of saw this slide, I think I saw it on Ericsson presentation. I kind of thought it was a bit cheesy, but actually I think it's really cool. There's some guy called the Pope in Rome or somewhere like that, and they changed them. And in 2005, it looked like that. And in 2013, it looked like that. Pretty much down to the work that we do. I think that's pretty cool from a point of view of how we're changing the world. Sadly, there's probably a lot of videos on random devices that no one ever watches, but you know, the need to be online and to be connected, both at a human level, but increasingly also at a machine level, is kind of growing at a dramatic pace. And we kind of recognized this back in UMTS days and tried to move to a more scalable architecture for LTE, and we got some of the way there, but probably not all of the way there, particularly on signaling, where there's still a number of challenges. Of course, we're the best. 50% better than Vodafone, of course. We've just deployed 4x4 MIMO in London. We've got a big program deploying that. You can see the kind of speeds that you get in central London right now. 657 meg, not bad. So there's still a lot in 4G. There's still a lot to come out in 4G, more carrier aggregation, more MIMO, and we've been doing a lot of work on that, but that's kind of feeded into 5G. So what's really 5G about? I kind of describe 5G as kind of a perfect storm sort of set of demands. We want more of what we've already got, more bandwidth, more throughput, but also there's a few things we want less of. Less latency, less failure, and when you kind of put these things together, you get a really ugly set of performance requirements. So we want 10 gig peak data rate requirements, an average of 1 gig, which is pretty significant, a latency of 1 millisecond, which means all your interfaces really have to be a lot simpler than they are today, because the interface is where we generate latency. And then not only that, we want a whole load more of it, 1 million connections per kilometre squared, and also we don't want it to use any power. So it's kind of like, holy shit, there's a lot to actually make work in this. And this diagram kind of shows the overlapping areas and also some of the contradictory areas. So you want more peak rate, but you want to use less battery. Now, obviously, these fit into different use cases for different segments and different sectors, but there's an awful lot of people in the world that are looking at how this technology might help them in their business and dealing with customers and dealing with things like, I'll skip this slide, things like healthcare, transport, agriculture. If you think about the number of sheep in the world, then having 1 million connections per kilometre square starts to make sense if you want to tag them all. Entertainment, automation, a lot of stuff in the news about robotics right now and how that's going to change the world. And I think that's, a lot of that will be powered by wireless technologies and 5G. But it's the big change in 5G is really about putting much more emphasis on non-human connection. And of course, those requirements are very different. If I think about things like, the great old example is automated car parks with the sensors everywhere. and you kind of know, you kind of book a space online and you kind of know it's there before you get there. I mean, it sounds really easy to do, but having a sensor that lasts 10 years and you don't have to change the battery every 2 weeks is non-trivial. But it's those sort of requirements that are driving that. And again, in order to make that work, you've got to start, you know, why do I use power? Where am I using power? And quite often that's in the protocols, in the interfaces, specifically in the air interface, also in the UE, the handset or the device that's driving it. And you've got to really think about everything almost from scratch about, okay, we did it this way, how do we actually, and this is the profile of power usage or data connectivity get or density that we get, how do we change that? So we've done a couple of use cases to testing. This is one of them. It was at Mobile World Congress last month. This is a 5G use case focused on low latency. And here we have a guy who's got a virtual reality headset and also a virtual reality glove, and he's manipulating this robot to make an incision and perform surgery. Now, I think this is one of those use cases that's probably wildly far away, but it really highlights some of the needs, both in low latency, but also you don't want to really hear that you've had an outage halfway through a heart surgery. That might be slightly challenging. So, you know, we did this demo working with King's College and Ericsson predominantly to show, you know, the worst, you know, the most challenging sort of case scenario of kind of an emergency sort of service. It can't fail, it's got to be low latency, and it's got to have a decent amount of bandwidth in it so you can see what's going on. And actually this works. I mean, I'm not sure I'd be going under the knife under it, personally speaking, but it does show that you can do this. Okay, you might be able to do it with other technologies, but what we want something that's ubiquitous and easy and kind of similar, so that, you know, if you go into a hospital, you go into an industry, they're not having to roll out 14 different solutions for the same thing, because in that world, it's an expensive world and no one will ever do it. Let's talk about a little bit about 5G core architecture. I think the key thing that, and we tried to do this in 4G to some extent, but didn't really get there, is really about separating control plane traffic and data plane traffic. And the real driver for this is, any of you have ever worked on mobile technology, but whenever you have a problem, the amount of signaling traffic determines really how successful you handle that outage. If you have a really bad day, and, you know, where you lose, I don't know, suppose you lost a city like Manchester and everyone's offline, and you turn it back on, just the sheer signaling traffic of everybody trying to attach will cause yourself a DDoS. So a big focus on this was to try and separate data plane traffic and control plane traffic so that we can manage it, monitor it, and tackle it better, but also, where appropriately, and this is what the NRF is on this diagram, assign more resources so that if you do have a huge signaling event, you can put more resources in place to do with it. The other functions here, UDM is effectively the next generation HSS, PCF is PCRF, user plane functionality, that's effectively tunneling server, and on this in 5G world, DN is the internet. I don't know why they just don't call it the internet, but that's what it is. So moving away from a wall where traffic from your handset and signaling traffic, control plane traffic, takes the same path and something that's very separated, and also gives you an ability to add resources when you need them, and then also be able to assign those resources to different use cases. There's one other thing I'll just mention very quickly here, because it's something that happened in the last couple of months. There's a big push to use what we call 5G NR, 5G New Radio, with legacy 4G evolved packet core. That's a core network for mobile. And we were very much in favour of trying to see if there was a way that we could have an interim step of driving 5G New Radio technologies without having to do all the work of migrating to a 5G core. And the reasons for that kind of start with this slide. There's a concept called network slicing. So you saw at the start the different types of use cases, from you know, emergency services to robotic surgery to car park to enhanced mobile broadband. all of these use cases have very different demands on the network. So wouldn't it be cool if you could slice the network and say, here's the resources for that use case, or here's the resources for that use case. Now, I actually personally think this is more of a scam from vendors to sell us something we've already got. You know, there's some sense in the ability of, if you've got emergency services traffic, so we're building ESN for the UK Home Office now, you want to make sure that's secure so that if someone needs a blue light service, you know it's going to turn up. So, you know, there's some element of reality for that, but whether I need that for, you know, managing lots of sensors, I'm less convinced about it. And it also concerns me about how much more operational complexity you generate every time you create a slice. And then some of the requirements for this rely upon NFV and SDN, and there's varying levels of maturity in that technology. That, you know, you're kind of thinking, do I really want to be rolling that out in the next couple of years? And I think operator land feels that, you know, we're probably not quite there yet, but a lot of work going on to do this. We did a trial of this technology working with Huawei to show how you could, you know, that signaling wall where you suddenly got a whole lot of users turn up at a football stadium, lots of traffic in the football stadium. How can I grow capacity, not just in the core network, but actually close and local to that stadium, so that everyone's connectivity in the stadium maintains, and it does work, but it's not as seamless and as painless as it needs to be, but potentially has the ability to change some business models. So if you think about roaming, for example, rather than doing a kind of a handoff based roaming that we do today, you might actually roam a slice to, say you got customers in the US, we might actually exchange a slice with AT&T so that you're actually based on a slice that's running in the US, and you know, that would help with a lot of issues around quality of service and maintaining the service levels you want to provide when you're roaming on another network. 5G new radio, talk a little bit about this. Again, you know, this is where it really comes home to roost, and this is a slide I borrowed from Qualcomm. There's kind of 3 or 4 approaches in 5G NR. One of them is, there's a big focus on the waveform. So today we use OFDM, which is the same sort of waveform that Wi-Fi and 4G uses today. And there was a lot of kind of soul searching, is that the way forward? And you know, a lot of chipset makers and other vendors put forward 3 or 4 other alternatives, but the reality is what we need is something that's simple. And OFDM, with a little bit of resource management added to it, window-based resourcing, OFDM is probably the simplest technology that we've got, and it would be mad to make it more complex and introduce a lot of challenges and issues related to that. So most of the pilots on 5G new radio are OFDM based. I suspect that will be the same. The only area where I think where we'll see change on that is very much around devices that will just transmit. They won't actually ask to transmit. They'll just say, I'm going to transmit. And you know, the network will capture that, or it will continue to transmit, rather than doing a kind of a handshake to connect. I think we need a slightly different approach to that. And actually that's more in, there's 2 phases of the radio. There's the first phase that comes up for standardization next year, and then there's is it next year? Yeah, 2018, then there's another phase that comes sometime after that. I suspect that will fall into the second part. But you can see, you know, the areas that this needs to take care of, from mission critical control, massive machine type automation stuff, and obviously the thing that we're used to, data, and being able to download YouTube videos, and all these areas kind of conflict. But I think the goal of keeping it simple is probably the right one. Some info about the standards. So, you know, there's a lot of pressure. You can see how much work there is to do, and there's a lot of pressure to kind of try and launch things. You see a lot of operators talking about, we're going to launch 5G. Let me be really clear, if anyone's launching 5G before kind of this work plan is done, then they've probably launched 4G plus. Release 15, in our view, is really where 5G starts, and kind of we're focused on, you know, what we do in 5G will be focused around that release 15 deployment. There's some other things going on in standards as well around the architecture, which I've talked about. So moving to kind of service-oriented architecture, network slicing, but also convergence. So one of the things we're looking at is, obviously we run a big fixed network and it's got things like authentication, management control planes. We're trying to figure out actually how can we bring these two things together so that no matter what we're doing, we're using, you know, the same sort of credentials on mobile as on fixed. And we're really pushing that agenda in standards to try and simplify the operation of our network. There's a whole bunch of issues around phasing, and there's actually a whole program around how do we phase this change in, which, you know, I think we kind of got slightly wrong in 4G, hence why that's been created. A lot on radio. I mean, radio is where there's a huge amount of focus. And then the other thing is security. Clearly, the early days of 4G, we had some security wobbles. We ended up deploying a lot of IPsec to fix that, which I'm not convinced was the right answer, but it was a quick answer. How do we improve security? So I go to that car park token. I'll use that as an example. You build a car park, you don't want to change the tokens every week because there's a security exploit. So you want to roll out something that's going to be secure for 10 years. Does anyone have in their network something that they rolled out 10 years ago that's secure? Dave is, I can't wait to hear what that is, Dave. There's always one guy. What is it?
Not in a public audience.
Not in a public audience, yeah, okay. I think handcuffing your server to the cage doesn't count, Dave.
Not connecting it to a network.
Not connected to a network, yeah, okay. There's tinfoil hats being dished out at the back. So I think, you know, I mean, Dave makes a serious point. You want it secure, don't connect it. But that's, you know, in a world where everyone's trying to get connected, that's a challenging proposition. But the goal here is, you know, how can we really drive long-term identity protection, both from a point of view of knowing who you are, but also ensuring that there's privacy, key exchange, how do we do authentication, device certificates, which are an absolute nightmare. I mean, you pick up a handset from 10 years ago and it's like, my God, did we really use these? So, you know, a lot of challenges in that space. And then a few other things to throw in is millimeter wave. So talk a little bit about spectrum. 5G is looking at kind of a number of things that I've talked about. So, and we're, you know, this is different, you know, depending on which country you're in, but I'm going to talk mostly about what Ofcom have been doing because I think it's relevant for the UK. But looking at 700 megahertz band, which is really about, you know, low frequency spectrum travels through buildings, it travels great distances, it sadly can't do a lot of bandwidth, but if you want voice or you want a simple service like Twitter, it'll work. 3.4 to 3.8, really trying to build what I call a capacity layer where you can bring in a carrier from that band, drive it hard for whatever you need to do if you're in London downloading something. And there's an auction, I think due this year, that Ofcom are looking to auction spectrum in that band. I think 3 gigahertz band will be probably the first 5G stuff deployed in the UK. And then there's what we call millimeter wave, 26 gigahertz or above. So millimeter wave we kind of look at as above 6 gigahertz, and the other stuff we look below 6 gigahertz. This is really like about kind of trying to create a fixed wireless access product. You'll hear Verizon talk a lot about that, and others talk a lot about fixed wireless access. I have to say, we've done a lot of work on this in BT, and you know, it's hard to see a use case that works for it. Making stuff go through a cable at high speed is difficult. Making stuff go through air at high speed is difficult and expensive. And when we look at, you know, when we've looked at this, typically a 3-year, 4-year deployment of fixed wireless access for an average customer, the cost of that, you know, over a reasonable life cycle, isn't that much in actually building fiber to them. So I think there's an awful lot of kind of, what's the word, bandwagoning to undo in this space, because I struggle to see it. If you're ever in Adastral Park, happy to show guys what we're doing in this space in terms of what bandwidth you can get, but the scalability of it doesn't, for mass market deployment, doesn't look good. People talk about niches. And those niches are fine as long as bandwidth doesn't grow at the rate it's growing today. If you have bandwidth growing at the rate we have today, then after about 3 or 4 years, you start to run into big challenges. But we're continuing to look at that. It's an interesting area, but we're probably more focused on the sub-6 gig mobile stuff than anything else. I'm being hassled for time. There's a bunch of implementation scenarios, so flying antennas on drones or for emergency services, microcells. I think you'll see a lot more small cells in this world, especially because the spectrum we're deploying doesn't pass through buildings, so we need to regenerate it much more. Massive MIMO, this is linked to the previous, if you look at the kind of bits per hertz that we have in the fixed network, and you try and recreate that in the mobile network, it's really difficult to do it. Here's a thing we've been working with on Bristol University, where we were trying to drive a huge uplift in bandwidth. Actually, we proved that it can be doable, but it's really, really difficult. So this is a lab that we've got at Ashwell Park, where we have people driving around trying to maintain it working. The MIMO part works really well, the beamforming works really well, but the minute there's a building in the way, stuff stops working very quickly. Less of an issue for fixed, but in order to do it, the sort of equipment that you need, the antenna style that you need is pretty significant. I talked about convergence. This is about us trying to bring together fixed and mobile. And in summary, there's a lot of things we want to do in 5G, and we're trying to focus to make sure that, rather than do 50 things badly, we do 2 or 3 things well. 4G is great. It's getting faster. We're building more out. We've got some really challenging implementation timescales. So, when the standards kind of mature in 2019, there's a lot of radio to deploy, a lot of backhaul to deploy, and we're working with industry and trying there. But my message to everyone is, let's focus on the things that make a difference rather than the press releases that don't. And that's it for me. Any questions? We have one here. I can't see who it is, unfortunately.
Hi, Paul Waring. I'm not affiliated with anyone. My question was, as you're getting excited about all this 5G and stuff, how does it impact on all the legacy stuff that you've got to carry on supporting? Because you've got 2, 3, 4, you're adding 5. At what point does that become sort of unmanageable almost?
Yeah,
because you're adding stuff and never getting rid of anything.
It's a really good question. I think 3G is probably the area where the days are numbered the most. And we've already started looking at how we refarm 3G spectrum. But clearly there's a take-up issue. We need people to take up 4G. 2G kind of comes free with 4G. The platforms that we buy, we can manage them from the 4G platform, not that big an issue. And most of the radio build-out that we're doing is kind of 4G, 2G combined. But our first attack, probably place of attack, will be to kind of discontinue 3G. It's the most difficult platform to run because it's still half TDM, half packets. It's pretty ugly standard, actually. So that'll be the area of focus. But we need to make sure that those customers that have got only 3G devices, we find a way of migrating them to 4G. So that is the longest pull in the tent. The technology issues, man, they're easy. We can turn it off tomorrow if we wanted to. But it's all about moving those customers. So, and then the benefits. I don't know if you've ever seen an antenna, a 4G or a 3G or a 2G antenna. And then what a 5G antenna is going to look like. I mean, it's cranes to kind of move this stuff around. So there's a big challenge on if there's any 3G specific electronics to recover. How do we go do that? Because obviously we rent space in cell sites and towers on roofs. We don't want to keep renting it and have stuff that's making less, less money for us or less stuff that we don't want to invest in. So, but we also want to free up the spectrum because there's a slide I should have put it in here, but here's a truth. There is no more spectrum. We've kind of got a band that exists, and in the kind of sub-6 gigahertz space, the number of spaces that exist are very low. So refarming old technology like 3G, we largely don't have a choice on it. So I think you'll see all operators probably kill 3G first, is my prediction.
Hi, Matt Wilson, IX Liverpool. Thanks for the great talk, Neil. My question is around low-powered Wi-Fi networks, or especially the likes of LoRaWAN, which is obviously for the Internet of Things as a low-powered system. We're currently rolling out the network throughout Liverpool. We have 10 access points about to go live around the city. And obviously these things transmit a very low power and it's very low bandwidth. What's your opinion in terms of 5G, once it does come along, the impact it's going to have towards low-powered networks, such as LoRaWAN?
I think they'll be complementary. I think LoRa has a place. As many of my peers in the industry would love to see LoRa die. I personally think it has a place. I think it's a good technology. You know, the car park scenario that I talked about, I think it's a great technology where you put a LoRa gateway into the rest of the world. I think that has possibilities. But what's really going to drive it is device and costs and capabilities. So if the LoRa guys can keep adding to it and keep making it relevant, then it will stay around forever. My view is it's complementary, at least probably in the 5G space. Beyond 5G, who knows? But that's, you know, hopefully 10 years away before we start talking about 6G. But you know, if you're rolling out LoRa right now, and actually we've got some LoRa stuff ourselves in BT and Milton Keynes, we still see that there's a future for that. But it's a different system with different skills and different back-end systems to run. So you got to think about, is there a simpler way of doing that? Our approach to that world right now is kind of 4G MB IoT, which is what we're focused on right now. But you know, underground car parks, you got to get coverage there, and short of building a cell site, which would be quite expensive, you know, LoRa's a good alternative.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim, did you have a question?
Hello. Oh, there we go. Simon from Auto Trader. How do you see this affecting things like rural broadband? Because obviously that's still a big thing at the minute. My father's still got some ADSL 1 stuff, I think it is, or barely ADSL 2 anyway.
We'll turn off all ADSL 1 within the next 18 months, so he'll soon have ADSL 2. Probably won't make much difference to his speed, but it'll be ADSL 2. I think I'll be honest with you, I don't think it helps an awful lot. I think it'll help with basic services like voice. So, and in fact, we're already making a big difference on that right now with our ESM build out. So we've turned on 800 megahertz, and in rural places that's made a big difference. But if you want to do a big YouTube download, it doesn't help you. The fixed wireless access, you know, there might be some niche areas where, you know, you have a village where you put a mast up, but you've then still got to get backhaul to that mast. You've then got to figure out, if you're using 28 gigahertz, you know, how do you get it through walls? So you've got to put aerials up. There's still a lot of challenges in that space that and we've looked at a lot of them, we continue to look at them, but I think there's a view that there's a miracle cure in 5G for rural issues. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think there's those issues, there's higher bandwidths available, but to get those higher bandwidths, a huge amount more build is required. I think where FWA might make sense is a place like Hong Kong. You have lots of tall buildings. You might beam fixed wireless access from building to building. That's a use case that works. It's not really, you know, it's not really UK geography apart from maybe in London and Docklands. So I'm not sure it helps hugely, other than the basic coverage for connectivity. That's kind of my take right now. But let's wait and see.
Thank you.
Certainly something we're looking at as part of our broadband rollout. Can we use mobile technologies as a solution?
Hi there, Tim Chang. You mentioned on the performance requirements 1 millisecond latency from where to where, and do you think this is achievable?
I always ask that same question. I mean, where I'm looking at it is I want to try and get kind of that sort of speed within a kind of 100-kilometer radius. You know, so if you imagine you kind of dropped a bunch of stuff across the UK where there was never a customer that was 100 kilometres away from a major networking processing site. You know, some people call that cloud. That, you know, you'd be a millisecond away from some sort of compute capability. I think that's probably one of the most challenging aspects of the 5G standards. And then doing it at 1 gigabits per second. I think I could do that on fibre. I think it's challenging to do it on wireless right now without a lot of build and small cells. In small cells, you need to acquire sites, which means you've got landlords rubbing their hands, okay, I can make more money out of this, or councils trying to sell you access to properties, and it gets very complex very quickly. And then, you know, oh, EE are doing it, tomorrow Vodafone are doing it, and the landlords are all like, my God, there's 20 of you guys trying to install kit on my newsstand. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil.
Thanks, guys.